There are moments in life that don't feel like moments at all. More like slow leaks. You don't see the rupture when it happens. You feel it in the pressure drop, in the way the air changes. That's what that dinner in Chicago was for me. Not a lightning bolt. Not a meltdown. Just a long, quiet breath before the free fall. Kelsey had invited me to come along to her agency's quarterly partner dinner. This time hosted at a high-rise restaurant downtown that looked out over the lake. It wasn't unusual. I'd attended these kinds of things with her before, always playing the part. The steady husband, not too loud, not too invisible. A fixture at her side. Her +1 in the photo, the one holding her coat and politely laughing at marketing jokes. She looked stunning that night. Green silk dress, the kind of cut that whispered money without screaming it. She always knew how to thread that needle. The moment we stepped out of the Uber, she transformed. Her posture shifted. Her smile became slightly sharper. Her hand on my arm looser, like a switch had been flipped. Not fake exactly, just something else. We were seated at a long marble table with maybe 16 others, partners, stakeholders, a couple of clients she'd flown in from LA and Austin. Everyone wore that polished look. Suits without a wrinkle, teeth a little too white. The kind of people who introduce themselves with full names and accomplishments embedded into casual conversation. Kelsey slipped into it like it was a second skin. Her voice grew a touch higher, her laughter more strategic. She was running the show even if she wasn't technically hosting. I remember thinking, she's really in her element. It didn't bother me, at least not then. I was proud of her, genuinely. Watching her command attention across that table, I felt like I was seeing her through the lens everyone else did, brilliant, confident, magnetic. There were moments when I even caught her looking at me with that subtle smile she used when she was proud of me. That meant something to me. It always had. The conversation moved from revenue projections to creative pivots, to a new rebrand in Europe that had apparently made waves in a client's Q2 numbers. I nodded along, sipping my old-fashioned, making the occasional comment that landed well enough. No one expected me to talk much. That was part of my role, background noise. The calm counterpart to the star. That's when it happened. A waiter came around with the next round of drinks. He was young, nervous, trying to place the right glasses with the right people. He set mine down with no issue, then leaned slightly over toward Kelsey with a half-smile. "For Mrs. Goodwill?" he asked, glancing at the name card in front of her. I felt it before I processed it. That tiny tug in my gut. That sharp buzz behind my ears. Kelsey didn't skip a beat. She let out a soft laugh, easy, polished. "Oh wow, that's funny," she said, her tone light. "They must have gotten my name swapped with someone on the event list. I'm definitely still a Warner. Aren't I, babe?" She reached over and touched my hand with her fingers. Playful, dismissive. People around us chuckled, glad to have a reason not to dwell. The waiter stammered out an apology and moved on. Someone made a joke about software glitches or misprints. Just enough noise to smooth it over. But I wasn't laughing. Goodwill. James Goodwill. The name didn't land like a punch. It landed like a bookmark. A reminder of a page I turned too quickly. A few months back, I had been looking up our flight confirmation on her iPad while she was in the shower. A routine weekend thing. We were flying to Charleston for our anniversary. Her email had been open. Nothing dramatic. But the name caught my eye. A message from James Goodwill, flagged with a star, titled Recap, Brand Lab Austin. I remembered asking her about it later. She'd said he was a consultant, someone her agency brought in occasionally when upper management wanted an outside lens. She had called him oddly intense, but really sharp. I hadn't thought much of it. Why would I? She had told me what it was, and I believed her. Or rather, I chose to believe her. But now, hearing that name said aloud by a stranger, printed clearly enough for a waiter to read, that wasn't a mix-up. That was a name on a seating chart. That was someone submitting a list that matched a reservation. That was her being listed under another man's name. It didn't make sense. And yet it made too much sense. Kelsey quickly shifted the conversation, cracking a joke about software errors that made everyone laugh. She leaned into a conversation with the creative director beside her and didn't look at me again for the next 10 minutes. Meanwhile, I was barely hearing the words being said around me. My eyes wandered. I studied her mannerisms. The way she lightly touched the back of her neck. The way she spoke with her hands, her fingers mimicking a typewriter motion when explaining a concept. These were things I'd seen hundreds of times. But suddenly they felt like performance cues. Rehearsed. Calculated. Had they always been? I started to run through every conversation we'd had about her travel. The strategy intensives. The late nights finishing brand frameworks. The Zoom meetings she said she couldn't take at home because the client was high-strung. James Goodwill. I remembered how she once mentioned that he had no boundaries. But it had been in that casual, brush-it-off way, like she was laughing about an awkward colleague, not someone worth remembering. Except now it felt deliberate, like she was placing the idea in my head just enough to keep suspicion at bay, while keeping the reality of it hidden in plain sight. Was that the whole game? I reached for my wine glass, trying to hide the trembling in my fingers. The glass touched my lips, but I didn't drink. I just stared straight ahead at the shimmer of the city lights outside the window, my face painted in candlelight and forced calm. Everything around me looked the same. The elegant table setting, the curated background jazz, the murmured conversations and the clink of cutlery. But something inside me had changed. A fracture had opened up, small, but undeniable. After dinner, there was a toast. Kelsey stood, thanking everyone for their support, acknowledging a big campaign win. She was flawless. People clapped. Glasses were raised. I smiled. I even clapped. I did everything I was supposed to do. But inside, I was elsewhere. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was disoriented. Like I had walked into a room I thought was familiar and found all the furniture had been subtly rearranged. Everything looked the same, but it no longer felt like mine. When the night finally wrapped and we stepped outside into the chilled Chicago air, Kelsey leaned against my arm, slipping her hand into mine. "Thanks for coming tonight," she said. "You were perfect." I looked down at her and nodded, trying to smile. But in my chest, something had gone still. She thought I hadn't noticed, and maybe I hadn't until that very moment. But now I had, and I wouldn't be able to unsee it. The illusion had cracked, and the silence that filled its place was louder than anything she said to me that night. I didn't go home that night. After the dinner, I told Kelsey I was going to walk off the cocktails, maybe grab a late coffee. She kissed me on the cheek and said she'd meet me back at the hotel. I nodded, handed her the room key, and walked into the night without looking back. I walked for hours, down Michigan Avenue, past the glittering storefronts that felt too pristine, too choreographed. The city felt like it was watching me, reflecting my own confusion back through glass and shadows. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I couldn't sit in that room with her just yet. Not with that name echoing in my head. Goodwill. It looped over and over, not just the name itself but everything attached to it. The moments that had slipped past me without inspection. I started tallying them like a detective too late to the crime scene. There was the Austin trip. Supposedly a client deep dive for a lifestyle rebrand. She'd packed 3 days' worth of clothes into a 5-day bag. I'd asked why the extra heels. She'd said, "You never know how long a pitch might turn into drinks." I'd laughed, trusted her. That was my first mistake. When she came back from that trip, there was a scent on her. Not perfume, cologne. Faint, but present. I remember the moment so vividly now. The way she brushed past me and that unfamiliar note lingered. I'd asked, half joking, "Make any new friends in Texas?" She smiled. "Just the Uber drivers." I had laughed. She hadn't. Then there were the phones. One day, maybe 6 months ago, she started carrying two. The excuse was simple enough. Work gave me a new one just for client-facing stuff. Made sense. She was moving up, taking on bigger accounts. I didn't think twice. But soon, she stopped leaving either of them out in the open. No more texts lighting up across the dinner table. No more calendar alerts visible during our Sunday planning sessions. One by one, those small shared rituals disappeared. She stopped syncing our calendars. That one hurt more than I admitted. We used to coordinate everything, meals, trips, even dentist appointments. But then she said syncing was too messy and started managing her schedule solo. I tried to brush it off as her being overwhelmed. I kept telling myself she just needed space. But space has boundaries. And boundaries, I've come to learn, are very different from walls. She built walls. Quiet ones. Soft ones. But walls nonetheless. The signs had been there for a while. I just hadn't wanted to see them. I didn't let myself see them. I was the guy who brought her coffee during her 10 p.m. deadlines, who left her sticky notes that said "crush in it" when she was prepping big pitches. I thought we were solid. I thought the tiredness was just life. Work stress. Pandemic burnout. Something explainable. But that's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't arrive all at once. It drips in slowly, like water under a floorboard. By the time you notice the rot, it's already spread. There were other things, too. The night she came home from a strategy retreat in Vermont, she'd told me it was all women from her team, but I saw a man's hoodie stuffed at the bottom of her suitcase. It wasn't mine. I remember pulling it out, confused, holding it up like some kind of artifact. She laughed. "Oh, that must have been in the Airbnb. One of the hosts, maybe." And I believed her. Because why wouldn't I? Because I still wanted to. Because believing her was easier than imagining anything else. But now, in hindsight, it all aligned. The late meetings that turned into missed dinners. The way she started locking her laptop the moment I walked into the room. Even her playlist habits changed. She'd once shared every favorite song with me, building collaborative Spotify playlists for every road trip, every mood. But lately, her playlists had gone private. When I asked, she shrugged. Work clients. NDA stuff. Music. Under an NDA. I should have known. I stopped walking and looked up. Somehow, I'd ended up in Millennium Park, the bean reflecting back a distorted version of me. I stared at it for a long time. There I was, bent, twisted, unfamiliar. A man who'd built a life with someone who had slowly rewritten the script without telling him. I sat down on a bench, legs aching, hands stuffed into my coat pockets. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. I was just embarrassed. Not in the loud public sense, but in the quiet, internal way. The shame of not seeing it. Of being so completely removed from the truth that it had to be handed to me by accident. By a waiter with a tray of wine glasses and a name card that didn't belong. A name card she hadn't even flinched at. I replayed her reaction in my mind 100 times. The way she laughed. Not nervously, not guiltily, but professionally. It was rehearsed, practiced, as if she'd prepared for that possibility. As if she'd prepared for me to be confused and had built an explanation in advance. She hadn't panicked. She'd redirected. And that was the moment I stopped making excuses for her. Because when someone lies with ease, it's not their first time. I checked the time. It was past 1 a.m. I should have felt exhausted, but adrenaline was doing a good job of numbing everything else. I didn't call her, didn't text. I didn't want her voice in my ear, weaving another layer of the story. I needed distance. So I walked to a small all-night diner just off State Street. Sat in a corner booth. Ordered coffee I didn't touch. I stared at the napkin dispenser and thought about our wedding. I remember how she looked that day. Not just the dress or the flowers, though she did look incredible. But her eyes. The way she looked at me like there was no one else in the world. Was that real? Had that ever been real? Or had she always been this good at performing? I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't about cheating. Not entirely. This was about erasure. About slowly being pushed out of a life I thought we were still sharing. She hadn't screamed at me. Hadn't belittled me. Hadn't thrown things or made dramatic exits. She just disconnected. Like unplugging an appliance and never plugging it back in. I kept pressing buttons, but nothing responded. That was the worst part. The quietness of it. The slow death. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our recent texts. Most were logistical. Dinner at 8. Flight at 7:45. Don't be late. Can you pick up the dry cleaning? Nothing int asterisk mate. Nothing us. And then I saw it months ago. A text from her at 11:17 p.m. On a random Wednesday. Just landed. Long flight. Exhausted. Miss you. I remembered that night vividly. She said she was in San Diego for a client pitch. But the timestamp didn't match up with the flight itinerary she'd shown me. I had noticed it then, briefly, but I hadn't pushed. I had assumed I misremembered. Now I knew better. I opened a browser and started digging. Flights. Hotel receipts. Old emails. Piecing together a timeline not meant to be pieced together. And bit by bit, it began to take shape. The signs were always there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. But now I did. And I couldn't close my eyes again. By the time I made it back to the hotel, the sun had already started pushing its way up through the edges of the skyline. The early glow turned the windows pale gold, making the city feel deceptively warm. It wasn't. The air was still bitter. So was I. I used my keycard and stepped quietly into the room. Kelsey was asleep, curled on her side under the white hotel duvet, one arm thrown over the pillow like she was hugging it. Her breathing was slow, peaceful. Too peaceful. It infuriated me in a way I didn't expect. I didn't wake her. Instead, I sat down in the chair by the window and stared at her. This woman, my wife, who could smile at a stranger and lie without blinking. Who could stand in a room full of people, toast success, and be hiding an entire life just beneath the surface. I watched the way her chest rose and fell. I studied the face I thought I knew better than my own. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know her at all. She stirred a little. I stood up before she could wake fully and moved to the couch where her laptop rested, half tucked under a folder marked Deck Revisions V5. Normally, I would have never touched it. We respected boundaries, or I thought we did. But now, every rule felt suspended. Every promise already broken. I lifted the screen. It was unlocked. Her desktop was pristine, exactly like she kept her real life. Everything labeled, organized, polished. No clutter. No mess. One folder stood out. It wasn't named after a client or a region or a campaign. It was buried 3 layers deep inside another folder labeled Q3 Archives. Its name? Q3 Personal Control. I clicked it. What opened next didn't make sense, not at first. Dozens of files. Documents, PDFs, image folders. A spreadsheet titled Engagement Map. A set of calendar entries. Some files were named like Corporate Materials, Schedule Alignment, Touchpoint Cadence, Messaging Layers. But as I opened them one by one, it became clear these weren't work files. They were blueprints. Each document tracked a different thread of her double life. The spreadsheet, it listed specific dates, locations, hotel confirmation numbers, and the names of men, plural, next to phrases like emotional range, wardrobe cues, tone objectives, and, chillingly, exit risk management. James Goodwill's name showed up most often. Color-coded green. There were charts tracking behavior. How many days passed between meetings? Which perfumes were used for which men? One document even outlined how to modulate authenticity, depending on whether she was dealing with a creative director or a senior executive. There were references to things I had said, things I had done, quotes from our conversations. A section titled, Managing Home Narrative. I was listed as primary domestic variable. That was my role in her life, a variable to manage. My throat closed up. I opened another document. It was a Word file titled Separation Messaging. The contents read like a press release. After years of meaningful partnership and mutual support, we've decided to part ways with deep respect and gratitude for the journey we've shared. She had written out a script, with alternate versions depending on whether I reacted with confusion, sadness, or anger. Each variation came with suggested public phrases, hashtag strategies, a photo recommendation from our trip to Sedona. She had tagged it potential farewell visual, authentic tone. I stood up, my chest tight. I felt physically sick. There was more. I clicked into a folder labeled Visuals. There were **TS, snippets of text conversations, cropped carefully to avoid identifying details. Photos from hotel balconies, mirrors, partial reflections. Her smiling. Her lounging on a bed. Sometimes fully clothed. Sometimes not. Always composed. Always curated. There were even notes beneath the photos. 12th floor, the James, successful emotional leverage. Post-meeting. Maintain softness for 48 hours before pivoting to assertive language. Mirror angle too risky. Avoid similar sh*ts. Couldn't breathe. She wasn't just cheating. She was documenting it. She was analyzing it. She was planning it. This wasn't about falling out of love. This was campaign-level betrayal. She had mapped her exit from our marriage like a launch sequence. With contingencies. With backups. With talking points. And the worst part? She hadn't stopped. There were recent files. Updated timestamps from just last week. She wasn't conflicted. She wasn't stuck. She was running the playbook, still fine-tuning the campaign. I was the only one who hadn't seen the deck. I stared at the screen, not sure how long I'd been standing there. A dull hum filled my ears, like the city noise outside had been *cut out and replaced with static. My legs felt numb. I opened one last document. Final phase draft. Q4 public transition. It detailed how she planned to shift our personal story to match her professional brand's evolution. As part of my realignment toward purpose-driven strategy, she had written, "This season of personal growth invites me to make space for reinvention, both professionally and personally." She didn't write it like someone leaving a husband. She wrote it like someone launching a new product. And I was the obsolete one. The final paragraph outlined how she would notify friends, select clients, and mutual connections on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email. There was even a table of anticipated reactions and her responses. Some were highlighted in yellow. I shut the laptop. My hands were shaking. I looked back at her, still asleep, still peaceful. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely disconnected from the woman in front of me. Like I was staring at a stranger who had simply been wearing someone I loved as a disguise. I didn't know what to do. Not yet. But I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't ask her for an explanation. I wouldn't let her gaslight me with polished phrases or half-truths. I wouldn't play the role she'd written for me, the one where I quietly accept my place in the narrative she designed. No, I deserved more than that. At some point, Kelsey stirred, turned over in bed, muttering something in her sleep. I backed away from the couch, careful not to make a sound. I grabbed my coat, slipped out of the room, closed the door softly behind me, and walked back out into the cold. When people imagine a breakup, especially the kind that ends a marriage, they picture shouting, tears, plates breaking, someone collapsing to their knees on the kitchen floor. That wasn't my ending. My ending was quiet, like the last second before a fuse goes out. No explosion, just absence. I didn't storm out of that hotel room the next morning. I didn't call a friend. I didn't even send a single text. Instead, I walked aimlessly for hours. I ended up at a lakeside park just as the morning runners started hitting the trail. Everything around me was normal. Birds overhead, joggers in bright gear, the occasional couple with matching water bottles. I felt like I was watching it all through glass. When the numbness gave way to clarity, I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not then. Not in some ugly, tear-filled moment where she could seize control of the narrative again. I'd already seen how she operated. Her *p*n was precision. Timing. Framing. Every word calculated. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I wouldn't be part of her script. So I returned to the hotel around 9 a.m. just as Kelsey was waking up. She smiled when she saw me. "There you are," she said, stretching like a cat. "You disappeared last night." "Just needed air," I said, forcing a neutral tone. She nodded. "Well, good thing you didn't freeze. Chicago in October isn't kind to night owls." I smiled back. Or maybe I just moved my face in a way that resembled a smile. Inside, something had already detached. I showered, dressed, packed, and told her I had to catch up on a client call back home. She didn't question it. She kissed me once, lightly on the cheek, I remember that specifically. Not the lips, not int asterisk mate. Just polite, like we were distant relatives. We flew back that afternoon, sat side by side. She watched a rom-com on her tablet. I pretended to read. The plane rumbled softly beneath us, and I stared at the clouds, feeling like I was already gone. That night, she fell asleep quickly. I stayed awake. Her laptop sat closed on the nightstand, glowing faintly with notifications she hadn't silenced. I didn't touch it again. I didn't need to. I had already seen the truth. And once you've seen it, you can't pretend you didn't. Instead, I got out of bed and began making a list. A quiet one. In my head at first, then on my phone. What do I need? What is mine? What do I take when I leave the life I thought I'd have forever? The next morning, before she woke up, I took action. I drove to the bank, ordered digital copies of every joint financial statement. I called my insurance provider and removed her as a primary contact. I ordered a reissue of my passport, not because I planned to flee the country, though the thought was tempting, but because I didn't want her name tied to anything else. I even visited the safety deposit box we barely used and pulled the only thing in it. Our wedding photo USB and a charm bracelet I gave her 6 years ago that she never wore. Then I returned to our apartment, our home, and started packing. Not everything, just enough. I packed my passport, my social security card, my laptop, chargers, a few books I couldn't imagine not having. I left the things that didn't matter: socks, framed prints, furniture, things that could be replaced. I wasn't after revenge. I was after separation. I walked through each room one last time, but I didn't linger. Our living room, once the place where we binged entire seasons of bad TV while eating takeout, now felt sterile. The kitchen, where I used to make her favorite lemon pasta after long weeks, felt like a showroom. It was all curated, just like she was. I entered her office, the place she'd remade during lockdown, the room with the big ring light and the fake plant wall that clients always complimented. On her desk, I placed a folder. Inside it, printed copies of the key files from her Q3 personal control folder. Just the essentials. I didn't write a note, didn't underline anything. Just left it there where she'd be sure to see it. Let her wonder how much I read. Let her wonder how long I'd known. On the kitchen counter, I placed one final item, my wedding ring. I set it beside her favorite mug, the one that read, "Lead with empathy." A cruel little joke, considering. Then I opened the door and stepped outside. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. I walked out into the morning air, down the steps, and into a cab I had scheduled in advance. I checked into a short-term rental 3 neighborhoods over. A loft above a bookstore. Nothing fancy, just somewhere she wouldn't think to look. I didn't post anything. Didn't call mutual friends. I didn't want witnesses. I wanted space. She didn't call that day, or the next. First, I wondered if she even noticed. But of course she did. She was just calculating her response, choosing silence as a strategy. She assumed I would crawl back, full of questions, needing clarification, apologies, closure. But I wasn't confused. I was clear. By the 3rd day, I had started laying the groundwork. I hired a lawyer. Not a pit bull, but someone known for clean exits. I didn't want to destroy her. I just wanted out. She had already gutted the marriage with precision. I didn't need to burn the remains. We filed quietly. No announcement. No press. No performative statement on growth or mutual evolution. Just paperwork. Clean, factual, boring. The way endings should be when love has already left the building. A week later, I drove back one final time. She wasn't home. I collected 2 more boxes. Some winter coats, a few gifts from my parents, and an old sketch pad from college that she'd tucked into the back of a closet. I hadn't drawn in years, but something about that book felt important. Like it belonged to the version of me I'd lost in the shadow of her ambition. I stood in the doorway for maybe 3 seconds. Then I left for good. No dramatic final words. No voicemail. No postscript. I let her discover the silence on her own time. And that, more than anything, was what she hadn't expected. She had planned for every reaction. Rage. Sadness. Confusion. But she hadn't planned for calm. She hadn't planned for quiet. Because in her world, silence was just a space waiting to be filled with messaging, with narrative, with control. But this time, the silence wasn't hers to shape. It was mine. And it was absolute. The first night alone in the loft was the strangest kind of relief. No one asking where I was going. No ambient sound of emails pinging from her side of the bed. No scent of her lavender pillow spray or the soft hum of her air purifier she swore helped her sleep. It was silent, truly silent. Not the kind of quiet that feels heavy with what's unspoken, but the kind that allows your thoughts to actually land. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the echoes of everything I didn't understand about my life. The only noise came from the occasional creak of the loft's floorboards and the city bleeding through the old windows. Sirens in the distance, wind against the glass. I turned off my phone that night, not airplane mode, fully off. I didn't want to be reachable. I didn't want notifications reminding me of the life I just stepped out of. There was something holy about disconnecting, about not allowing my pain to be turned into content or questions or checking in messages that came too late. For the first few days, I did nothing. No work, no conversations. I didn't even write. I just moved from the bed to the kitchen to the floor. Sometimes I'd stare out the window at the cafe below, watching strangers live out their routines. I envied their simplicity, the way they ordered coffee like the world wasn't about to collapse. I envied the rhythm, the smallness of their problems. Kelsey still hadn't reached out. At first, I checked my email once a day, just in case. Not because I wanted to hear from her, but because I wanted to confirm the absence. I needed to know that her silence was deliberate, controlled, strategic, and it was. She wasn't going to call, because calling meant acknowledging that the performance had ended, and she never liked losing control of the stage. On the 5th day, something inside me cracked open. Not with grief, but with a question I had never truly sat with. Why did I stay so long in a place where I was shrinking? Because that's what it had been, hadn't it? A slow, steady erasure. I didn't just lose a wife. I lost myself in the orbit of someone who required constant accommodation. Every preference, every boundary, every ambition of mine had been filtered through hers. At first, it felt like compromise. Then it became compliance. She was always the sun. I was the gravity that kept her path clean. I thought that was love. But real love doesn't ask you to vanish. In that silence, I started remembering pieces of myself I had put away. I remembered the version of me who used to get lost in museums, sketching strangers from a distance. The version who once spent 3 months building a wooden coffee table just to see if he could. The version who used to drive with no destination just to chase the right song at sunset. I hadn't seen that guy in years. I started to wonder if Kelsey ever even met him, or if she'd simply replaced him with someone easier to narrate. On day 7, I found the sketchpad I had pulled from the back of our old closet. I flipped through the old pages, charcoal smudges, half-finished drawings, and a note she once wrote on the inside cover. Never stop making things. It's the best part of you. That was back when her admiration was real, or at least when I believed it was. I picked up a pencil, and I started again. The drawing wasn't good. My lines were shaky. My sense of proportion had vanished. But it was the first time I felt like me in months, maybe longer. Later that night, I made tea in silence and stared at my ring finger. The skin was slightly lighter where the metal used to sit. A small, pale indentation. My own ghost. I had always imagined marriage as a shared story. 2 authors building something word by word. But now I realized, Kelsey had been editing in secret, writing her own ending. She hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been dishonest with the entire narrative. And I had been complicit in my own sidelining. Because silence had been my coping mechanism, too. Whenever she cut me off mid-sentence, I let it slide. Whenever she dodged questions with charm and jargon, I laughed along. Whenever I felt hurt by her absence, I swallowed it. Because I didn't want to be the needy one. I didn't want to be the man who demanded more. So instead, I took less, and less, until there was nothing left to take. But now, in this new silence, this earned silence, I started choosing different things. I opened a new bank account. I signed up for a woodworking class at a local makerspace. I started taking walks every evening without a destination, just to feel the city under my feet again. And I slept deeply. No late-night negotiations about her schedule. No midnight calendar syncing. No light from her laptop glowing through the sheets. I even started talking to people again. Not friends, not yet, but strangers. The barista downstairs. The old man who played chess in the bookstore lobby. The Lyft driver who told me he used to be a magician before the pandemic. These weren't deep conversations, but they were honest, unscripted, free of performance. Each one reminded me that the world still existed beyond her. By the 10th day, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in a while. Sarah. Kelsey's former colleague. One of the few people from her world who had always seemed real. Her message was short. Hey, I heard. Just want to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of this. I stared at it for a long time. It was the first acknowledgement from anyone that something had happened. That what she did wasn't just a breakdown of a relationship. That it wasn't just drifting apart. That it had weight. I replied simply, "Thank you. That means more than you know." A minute later, another buzz. Sarah again. "I know it's not my place, but I always thought you brought out the better side of her. I'm sorry she didn't protect that." I didn't respond to that one, because it wrecked me. She didn't protect it. She didn't protect me, and I had spent years protecting her image, defending her ambition, amplifying her wins, all while she built her escape. But now I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. I stood by the window that night, sketchpad in hand, tea cooling on the sill, and realized something. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need answers. I needed to stop asking questions about someone who had already written me out of the equation. The silence was no longer a void. It was a space, a blank page, and for the first time in a long, long time, I was ready to write again.